Alright, kings, gentlemen, everyone else, welcome to yet another exciting episode of Captain Without a Ship. And today I was thinking we should look back to the political underpinnings of the Ukraine-Russia war, since we already discussed the whole peace process bullshit last video, or was it video before last? I don't know, my memory's going. It's a thing when you get to be my age, first the knees go, then the names. Anyways, so essentially, like I said, the peace process was always doomed from the start. It was never going to result in anything because fundamentally it's done to placate Trump, to make a theater for the orange toddler. And the reality is that there will be no peace between Russia and Ukraine until one side or the other has compelled the other to act in accordance with its political aims. This is something we keep forgetting, that the biggest insight from Clausewitz, right, is that even though war has a grammar of its own, its logic is the logic of politics. War is waged according to political logic. The end aim of a war is always a political goal, and force is really just the instrument, the means towards the end. Hence the necessity for professionalization of the military profession, because force is a specialized field of human activity and human endeavor, necessitating expertise, learning, etc., etc., etc. We send people to specialized schools in order to become officers. We call those military academies. We send people to specialized schools in order to become soldiers. We call those boot camps, infantry school, artillery school, whatever. Some of us, we pretend to be naval men, so I'm not in the Navy. I just have this hat. Anyway, so what are the political aims of the two actors within the Russo-Ukrainian war? The political aims of Russia as the aggressor are obviously defining here. The political aim of Russia is to destroy Ukrainian nationhood and Ukrainian statehood as it exists separate from Russian statehood. This is because, for various historical reasons, some of which we've spoken about on this channel, the very idea of the Russian state is threatened by the separateness of Ukrainian nationhood. The source of legitimacy for the Russian state is that it's always expanding, always acquiring new territories in the name of the triune Rus, whatever the fuck, yada yada yada. So if Ukraine is a separate nation, and sovereign nation, and especially if it's a separate and sovereign nation which civilizationally belongs to Europe and not the Russian world, that's a phrase they use a lot, the Russian world, and there is some there is a civilizational difference between Russia and Europe, enough that we can say these people are outsiders, non-European in the cultural sense, in many cases even in the biological sense, right? Whereas Ukraine more clearly belongs to the European world rather than the Russian world. Of course, it is a liminal state. It is on the borders between the steppe and Europe, so it's necessarily going to have a complex identity, but will overall ultimately belong to Europe, not to the Russian civilizational paradigm. And this is intolerable to the Russians, so they set out to destroy not only Ukrainian statehood, but also Ukrainian nationhood. The nation of Ukraine, the idea of the nation, has to be shattered. This will necessarily entail killing the culture-bearing stratum of the Ukrainian nation. So the professors, the teachers, the poets, the priests, the artists, the intellectual of any sort, and fundamentally anyone who can cogently mount a defense of Ukrainian separateness, or even incogently, even someone who inchoately rebels against these very obvious outsiders will be a threat to this project. That is the political aim of the Russian state, and their methods of war reflect this. Their methods of war include bombardment of civilian sites, bombing maternity wards, kidnapping children and brainwashing them into believing they're Russian and that Ukraine is Ukrainian is a fake, simultaneously a fake and evil identity. This is why the obsession with denazification. They might as well have called it desatanization, exorcism, or whatever the fuck they're calling it. God, the sun is really scorching. And so that is at the core of the Russian political objective. And until such a time that Russia believes it can achieve either its maximal objective, which is the elimination of Ukrainian nationhood, or its minimal objective, which is to stay the overturning of Ukrainian statehood in accordance with Ukrainian nationhood. So dismantling Ukraine as a nation state and maybe transforming it into a puppet state, or a sort of Russian colony a la Belarus, which will then gradually erode Ukrainian identity, the way Lukashenko and previous governments of Belarus have gradually eroded Belarusian identity. Well, that would be the minimal goal for the Russians. They are nowhere near to achieving that, so they're not interested in peace. The war will continue until such time that the Russians have either achieved their, at the very least, minimal political goal, or have been deprived of the means and essentially made aware of the fact that they've been deprived of the means to do it. Because those are two different categories: what people can do and what states can do and what they believe they can do. Now on to the Ukrainian side, because Ukraine is the defender country, the defender state in this conflict. Their political goal will necessarily be the opposite of the Russian political war. Their war aims will be necessarily the opposite of the Russian war aims. Now, the war aims of Ukraine will thereby be the maintenance of Ukrainian nationhood, Ukrainian statehood, and especially Ukrainian statehood as part of the European civilizational paradigm rather than the Russian civilizational paradigm. And I would say that in all of those aspects, Ukraine is not only succeeding, but it has basically already succeeded, to the point where the only way that Russia could destroy Ukrainian nationhood at this point would be to physically destroy every living Ukrainian on the planet, and especially every Ukrainian living within Ukraine. So the first one is unlikely to happen, but the second one is eminently possible, unless drastic measures are taken. Drastic measures? What are the drastic measures? And here we get into our favorite subject, escalation, right? So what I think has to be done, and I think is already being done at certain levels of the Ukrainian state, certainly at the level of military intelligence, is that Ukraine needs to escalate its war aims to the destruction of the Russian Federation, to destruction of Russian statehood, because, as we said, it is a vital necessity for the current Russian state to destroy Ukraine. If Ukraine exists, the political formula of the Russian Federation is being eroded away, and the current regime would have to be reformed or completely overthrown, destroyed, and turned into something else. Maybe even the Federation itself would be dismembered. Eminently not a bad thing, I would say. So in order to decisively win the war, the Ukrainians need not only achieve their defensive war aims, which are protection of the Ukrainian territory, maintenance of the state, survival of the nation, but also they need to escalate into this new and proactive war aim, which is the destruction of the Russian Federation. Now, like I said, certain aspects of the Ukrainian government have already understood this, and certain governments in the West have already understood this as well. I'm talking here about the governments of Lithuania and Estonia, to a lesser degree Finland, and certain movements, political and otherwise, in the West and elsewhere have understood this, that we will not ultimately have peace on the steppes until, on the European steppe at least, the Pontic-Caspian steppe, until such a time as the Russian Federation is destroyed and Ukraine can be the instrument of its destruction. I'm reminded here of the first Chechen president, Dzhokhar Dudayev. I'm mangling that name, Jonkar Dudayev, saying that the Russian night will end when the Ukrainian sun rises. But what's necessary now is for this realization, which already exists partially in the Ukrainian government, and to an even greater extent, I would say, in the Lithuanian or Estonian or Finnish government, should proliferate within the European governments, all of them, especially Germany, Poland, France, United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, the large states of Europe, the big states of Europe, the powerful states of Europe. Here, I would add to this list Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, Denmark. Basically, every state of Europe must understand that as long as we are allied to Ukraine, we need to also think about having these war aims. Even though we are not at war in the kinetic sense, we are at war in the other means sense of the Clausewitzian model of war, the continuance of politics by other means, with a mixture of other means, right? So just because you're at war, it doesn't mean you stop the other means, you just add the military means. But yeah, we are at war with Russia in the cultural, in the economic, in the industrial sphere. And as the elections in Romania and all over the world really point out, there is a political and diplomatic and economic war raging between the West and Russia. And for the time being, our war aims are purely defensive. Protect our political processes, protect our economies, protect ourselves from cultural infiltration. But there is that old thing, shoot the archer, not the arrows, right? So I would say what we need to do is we need to recalibrate our war aims in order to complete the destruction of the Russian Federation. They are at their weakest that they have ever been. Russian Federation, Soviet Union, Russian Empire, doesn't matter. This is their lowest of low points. This is our chance to solve this problem once and for all. Once we do, we can remake the heartland of the Eurasian landmass into something that will work for Europe. Not for Asia, not for Russia, for Europe.